Hi, good evening. I'm Lonnie Stonich, the Executive Director of FAN, and I'm honored to welcome you to a fantastic conversation tonight between Dawn Turner and Heidi Stevens. Thanks for attending. FAN's a nonprofit organization that presents a high-quality speaker series offered free to the general public on a wide variety of topics, including human development, mental health, education, and social justice, among others. We have over 150 videos of past events archived on our website and on our YouTube channel, so please be sure to explore. And now for introductions of our guests. Dawn Turner is an award-winning journalist and author. A former columnist and reporter for the Chicago Tribune, she spent 15 years writing about politics, race, and class in Chicago and beyond, as well as telling the individual stories of people who fly below the radar. Ms. Turner, who served as 2017 and 2018 juror for the Pulitzer Prize in commentary, has written commentary for the Washington Post, the PBS NewsHour, CBS Sunday Morning News Show, NPR's Morning Edition show, and the Chicago Tonight Show. She spent the 2014-15 school year as a Nieman Journalism Fellow at Harvard University. In 2018, she served as a fellow and journalist in residence at the University of Chicago Institute of Politics. She's the author of 2 novels, Once, Only Twice I've Wished for Heaven, and An Eighth of August, and of course, her brand new 3 Girls from Bronzeville. Heidi Stevens, I'm going to do Heidi first. Heidi Stevens is the creative director for Parent Nation, a new initiative at the University of Chicago's TMW Center for Early Learning and Public Health. Parent Nation works to build a society that ensures all parents have the information, resources, and supports they need to optimally raise their children. Prior to joining Parent Nation, Ms. Stevens worked at the Chicago Tribune for 23 years, where she wrote a daily column called Balancing Act. She was awarded the Ann Keegan Award for Distinguished Journalism in 2018, and she maintains a nationally syndicated column once a week. We are proud to have also welcomed Heidi as a new FAN board member this past September. So now let's welcome Dawn and Heidi.
Thank you, Lonnie.
Thank you.
Hi, Dawn.
Hi, Heidi. So happy to be here with you.
I'm so excited. I've been looking forward to this night, dreaming of this night since I read your book and crossed my fingers and sent all sorts of prayers up to heaven that you would let me interview you.
Oh no, it's my pleasure. It's so much fun. I'm so excited.
Yeah. So let's talk about the 3 girls in the book's title are your sister Kim, your best friend Deborah, and you. You all start off in the same spot, but take very different paths to very different places. Kim dies by the age 25. Deborah ends up in prison after killing a man. I've seen your book described as an attempt to find answers. Why did they fall behind while you excelled? When did you begin to lose them? Do you feel like you found those answers in the writing of the book, or is that not even necessarily what you did set out to do?
Well, you know how when you start a journey, so many different things happen along the way. And so what you start out thinking, that is the premise of the effort, things evolve. So I want to go back a little bit because, as you said, this is a story about 3 girls who start out in a very similar place with very similar aspirations and take wildly different paths. My sister Kim, my best friend Deborah, and I were coming of age in the afterglow of the civil rights movement. And it was a moment when our parents believed that this country would finally be amenable to offering us the opportunities that it had denied generations of Black people. We were going to college, and I always say that because that's really important that they had these amazing ideas regarding our futures. They wanted us to go to college. They wanted us to have great paying jobs, and we would become homeowners and partake of every aspect of the American dream. But as you said, that dream would prove elusive for Kim and Deborah. And so I did set out, I think in the beginning, to understand why, but then because they were the loves of my life. And then it became not so much why, but when did we lose them? And that is that there was a critical moment in all of our lives when things can, can shift. And I think that margin of error is so much more pronounced among Black people and Black girls specifically.
That reminds me of something that I read that you said about the book, which is when we talk about equity, we have to also talk about empathy.
Yes.
Tell me what you mean by that.
I think a lot of times when we look at the various pathologies of our communities, of our neighborhoods, we look at people and we want to say, well, what happened to you? And even there have been interviews, or at least people have said to me in this book, I mean, so why did you, what happened? What made the difference in your life? And as I said earlier, in so many lives, there is this razor thin margin of error. And so whether no matter what community you grew up in, but often if you're in a more beleaguered community, then I mean that margin of error is even smaller. And so the whole idea of equity and empathy is a matter of, can we understand people and see people beyond the pathologies, but can we, I don't know if maybe it sounds cliche to say, can we walk in somebody else's shoes? Yeah. And I'm not even certain that that's necessary, but just to understand that we all make mistakes.
Right.
And sometimes it's, and I know I've made many mistakes over my lifetime. And sometimes it's just a matter of grace or luck or whatever, that we don't have such a dramatic ending or such a dramatic shift. And so that is where I think empathy comes in when it comes to equity. That so many times a lot of our stories are cast in, oh, well, you're doing somebody a favor, but it's not so much a favor. It's part of our, I think, humanity. There's so much talent that's being wasted. And I saw that in Debra and Kim, that they were absolutely brilliant as girls. And I mean, that's not hyperbole on my part, but they were smart. They weren't told. I was always told that I was smart. But they weren't told that. They were mostly told, stop asking all of these questions, fall in line. And so what happens to people who do not fit, who are a little bit more outliers? Yeah. Part of the story as well.
And who aren't given grace in the same measure as others.
Right. And sometimes that grace is the benefit of the doubt.
Right.
I mean, that is huge, or a second chance. And I saw the story as also being about that, about who gets the second chance, and when you do get it, who can make the most of it. And that's, I think, that's important too.
And you're candid throughout the book about moments in which you got second chances that sort of kept you on a certain path, or put you on a new path, but a path that led somewhere that allowed you to excel. I mean, was that hard to visit some of those moments and share them with the public, or did it feel like, of course I have to go there if I'm going to tell this story?
Well, I wanted this to be a story about three girls, and not a story about one girl talking about two other, and telling, I said the other night, telling everybody's business and not telling my own. Because, and I have to say that my editor, I have a wonderful editor in Christine Pride at Simon & Schuster, and she pushed me on that as well. Because when you write a book, I think I heard someone say, or someone read about someone saying that writing a memoir especially is like having a truckload of stuff that you just back it up and dump everything out. And then you have to sift through those things to find the story. And so in just trying to juggle so many different stories with the three of us, it was, and so I hadn't really gotten to me. And I felt like I knew Deborah's story and knew Kim's story. And in terms of my own, that was my own personal excavation. And so I won't say, from the beginning, I knew exactly what needed to go where. But this isn't writing whether it's writing a column or writing an article or anything, a book. There's so much information that we have, and we have to just sift through it to figure out the balance and how to create a story from all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that because your book is filled with so many, I guess you'd call them flashbulb moments, right? Just these really vivid snapshots that stand out in our memories. I'm thinking, for example, the first time you went over to David Trice's house and his dad offered to drive you home, and he took a detour by the basketball courts to show you that the nets had been taken down to keep Black kids from playing basketball there, right?
Yeah.
Have you been carrying all those flashbulb moments around in your conscious mind all these years, or did they start to return to you as you were writing?
Well, it's a combination because, as I say in the author's note of the book, I mean, there's the journalist in me who, I mean, and I don't know why I really did this, but I mean, I take notes all the time. And initially, even before I started to write the book, I would, I jot little things down. I've kept journals for much of my life. I've kept diaries. And so I was able to pull from that information as well as letters that David Trice and I wrote when we were in college. We went to two different universities that my sister and I wrote, that Deborah Trice, unrelated to David Trice, and which is another one of the little, just little fate, I think, things that are in the book. But so I had that information, and so I was able to go through it and so once I went through it, there was almost like instant recall, because I do believe that a lot of these stories are like in my molecules, and they're just there. And it's so important. And they were there when I've been asked, well, when did I start to write this memoir? I sometimes say when I was 3 years old, when I met my sister. Because that's when it started. And that's kind of when the story started. And so it was not at all easy to access the information all the time. And sometimes part of the process of accessing the information, it's a little painful, well, a lot painful at times. And so in terms of being able to incorporate it into something that was coherent in a story, I go back to my editor a lot, because she is a genius. And in terms of telling me, okay, we need this, we don't need that, that balance, creating the story it's not all the way organic. I mean, sometimes it feels that way, because especially if you're telling a story, well, this happened first, then this and that. And if it's told chronologically, there's a feeling that, oh, that's easy, but it's not, because you have to still make it a story. And so you're pulling the most critical moments of that story and piecing it together.
Yeah. I know parts of the book had to just be tremendously painful to revisit and to put down on paper. How did you take care of yourself while you were digging into some of your own grief and trauma?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because the way we move forward in life, especially with trauma, is that we pack it up. We grieve for whatever period, then we pack it up, and then we push it to the farthest recesses of the closet or whatever, and then we just don't go back into it. But I think that writing a memoir, you have to be a little bit delusional, because I just thought, I'm a journalist, I can do this.
You've written books before. It wasn't your first
exactly.
book.
I've read novels, I've read memoirs, I've read, and I just thought, well, I can do this. It's just, I'll just pace myself. But when I got to various moments in the book, and I do like to say that the book is not unrelentingly painful. There are moments of joy and all of that. But during the tragic moments, especially my sister's passing, I had a friend who allowed me just, just to hang out. And I was able to just write some. I wasn't alone when I wrote those passages.
Okay.
And then I could go back. Once I was able to dive into them, I could go back and edit them anywhere. But just really getting into them, I just didn't want to be alone.
That's really interesting. Yeah. So the physical writing process you would do with someone nearby.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But then edit it maybe on your own later.
Yeah, because that part, but I think it was just getting into it. It's like dipping a toe into the water, and I just needed to have that type of support. And then, I mean, there were sentences or paragraphs where I would just write a little bit, and then I'd have to walk a mile, or I'd get on my bike and ride or something, because there is something that felt like a very much, it felt like I could feel it in my body, and I felt like I had to work it out in order to just, to just keep going with it.
Yeah.
But I mean, this as a writer, there are so many different types of tricks that we employ. I mean, just to get through the story, and the stories don't always have to be painful to get to that point, because I mean, to this day, I've been writing for a very long time, but the blank page terrifies me.
Yeah.
And then as soon as there's like this, there's a certain number of words that I get on the page that I finally go, okay, like, oh my God, I can write this.
Yeah.
But until I get to that, to that word count, I'm like, who said this was a story?
Right. You always wonder if the last thing you wrote will be the last thing you wrote.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I've run out of words. I've used them all, and ideas.
I know, and it's like your editor. I was like, well, she doesn't. I don't know if she understands what she's gotten into, thinking I could do this. So all of this self-doubt, all of that stuff is very much in play, and it's just a matter of getting through it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how different was writing about Deborah while you were a journalist, in real time, as events in her life were unfolding, compared to writing about Deborah as a memoirist, when, obviously you have the perspective of reflecting on her life and knowing how it all turned out. But you're also a different person now than you were, when you were a Chicago Tribune columnist, right? You have different experiences and you have a different lens. So talk about the difference between covering Deborah as a columnist and writing about Deborah as a memoirist.
Yeah, it's interesting, because even writing about her as a columnist, when you're telling a personal story, even in the newspaper, you feel incredibly vulnerable. And so in 2000, when I wrote about her the first time, she had, it was during her trial. And so I wrote about her being sentenced to 50 years in prison for murder. And that was just, I couldn't believe that the story was unfolding, let alone I was writing about it. And then I wrote about her again in 2002 as kind of a follow-up. But it wasn't until 2007, when she graduated from college in prison with honors, that I realized, I mean, just the breadth of the story. I had gotten a lot of email, or maybe in 2000, it wasn't a lot of email, but letters about her story. But
there's a moment in the book where it's so evocative, maybe because I've worked in a newsroom, but there's like those bins of handwritten letters that you get when you get it, right?
I know. It's like, do people get letters anymore? I mean, clearly not as many. But it talks about the span of this book and the story. But in 2007, I just got an amazing amount of letters and email at that time. But I realized that initially her story was a cautionary tale, and it was something that maybe parents would clip out of the newspaper and hand to their child and niece or nephew or something and say, read this, and then don't go down that path. But in 2007, her story was a story about transformation and redemption. And we all love a makeover story, right?
Yeah.
And this whole idea that we can change our lives. And so you were asking about just the difference and covering that as a journalist compared to being a memoirist.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's really, there isn't much of a difference because you still, I mean, this is still my personal life. I'm talking about my childhood best friend, whom I knew before all of this, before the drugs and before prison. And I knew her to be that person who was very smart. And I remember her telling me when she graduated that she never knew she was smart. And that was, I mean, it broke my heart because I knew it immediately. I always thought she was brilliant. And so the matter of taking that information, or at least the way that I felt about translating it to the memoir, it felt really, that part of the story felt natural to me because I had written about it before. It was the other stuff that I hadn't written about that felt brand new. And I checked in with her at every step just to make sure I could tell various parts of the story, because I did wade through hundreds and hundreds of pages of court documents. And so that a lot of that stuff was new, and it was something that I had not written about before as a journalist. And so I wanted to make sure that the record, that I understood the story from that perspective as well.
Yeah, sure. Can you talk for a second about the conversation you had with your editor when you asked to write about Deborah? I think I recall he said something to you like, that never could have been you.
Yeah, my Tribune editor.
Sorry, Tribune editor.
Yeah, no, that's okay. Because he said, we write about murder cases all the time, and what makes a story different. And I said to him something like, well, I knew her, and I've never written a story or actually read a story in the pages of the Chicago Tribune about someone who's on trial for murder whom I knew. And it's like, well, why is this story so important? And part of it was that I've always felt there but for the grace of God go I. And I felt that regarding my sister, and I felt that with Deborah. And I said to him, because there's so many stereotypes about Black folks growing up in the city. And it was so important for me to say that, I mean, it breaks my heart. There are kids who are, I mean, they come out of the womb and they're almost consigned to a subpar life. And that always breaks my heart. And I've written about these kids and people in beleaguered communities. But I said to him, I mean, that's not Deborah's story. I mean, we were, as young people, we were pointed toward the sun. And that is where we were supposed to land. And clearly, I mean, that's what our parents had in mind for us. And they were not wealthy at all, but they had resources in that they knew somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody who could potentially help if they needed. And that was the difference in her story, that for the first time I knew somebody. I mean, you can read all the stuff that's there, but I knew somebody personally, this little girl whom I had first seen in the second grade. She was already prom queen pretty. And our worlds did not touch then because we were arranged alphabetically. And I'm sorry, we were arranged according to height. And I was the tallest girl in the class, and she was the shortest. And so our worlds didn't touch. But in the third grade, we were arranged alphabetically. And she was seated across from me, Deborah Trice across from Dawn Turner. And we learned we had so much in common. We not only lived in the same apartment building that had 24 stories, but her apartment, how did this happen, was directly above mine. Her bedroom was directly above mine. And we both had one sibling. Her sister was older, my sister was younger, and we just became best friends. And so 25 years later, when I'm talking to an editor about writing about her murder trial, I mean, to me, this was the story of the century, because it was just, and I understood I understood how he would look at me and say, when I said to him that, you know, not only because I love her, this is a story, but because you know, she was set on a different path and kind of veered. And I knew that he would look at me and say, well, oh, that would never happen to you. And I just thought, well, you know, you are someone, you believe that every time you do something right, or you could that it's enough to do something right, and you will land where you plan to land. And that is not the belief that I come from.
Yeah,
That
kind of a
you
just
know,
world
yes,
fallacy. Right.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So interesting. Let's talk about your Friday night interviews with your dad, which I just love. You wrote, although Kim and Deborah discovered their daring as children, I'd found mine as a writer. My notebook doubled as my shield, my pen as my sword.
Yes.
The chapter where you're interviewing him and about his life and learning about his upbringing and his life before you, it's one of my favorite in the book. What do you think you'll do with those interviews?
Oh, I think that's where they land in that chapter. I think that's it.
Okay.
And they were, I mean, there were months and months of them. I mean, my father had a heart attack, and I was covering a story, actually doing some background for a column, and my mother called me to tell me that. And so I was so surprised by how moved I was, because my father and I had a very complicated relationship. And so when I got the news, I raced to the hospital, because I felt like if he died, there were so many questions that I had. There was so much that I wanted to know, that if he passed on, I would not be able to get that information. And so I decided to meet him at his job. He worked at a taxi company. And on Friday nights, he was the overnight manager. And on every Friday night from, I think it was March 4th of 2004, and I may get that, it was in March of 2004 to July of 2004, I spent every Friday night with him. And I knew that I could not interview him as a daughter. And so I had to do it as a journalist. And I left because I was going to cover, with a team of Chicago Tribune reporters, I was going to cover the Democratic National Convention. And that was the year that Barack Obama delivered his, big speech at the convention. And but over those months talking with my father, I learned that my grandfather had bought 160 acres of land in Mississippi. And he was this kind of rebel. I mean, this was in the 1920s in Mississippi, in Jim Crow South. And he tried a more humane form of sharecropping, and just the land. I mean, just all of the peach trees, the pecan trees. I mean, just all of these things that I learned about my father and my family. It was so necessary. It was gratifying. And the other thing I'll say about that is, I wanted the men in the book. I mean, a lot of people talk about the women, because the women were my fort. I mean, I adored them. Yeah. But I also wanted—
You mean your mom and grandma?
My mom, my aunt, my grandma, yes.
Kim and Deborah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But yeah, all of them. I mean, but I feel like so often I read the passages of Black men. I mean, they're so disparaging. And so I wanted the men to be, I mean, I wanted to be honest, but to be complicated, as we all are, and robust, and kind of full-bodied as characters, if we can say they're real people. But I wanted them to have dimensions. And so whether it was my father-in-law or my father or my uncles, that was very, very important to me, that they did not come off as these stereotypical caricatures. And so in speaking with my father, I learned, so I hope that this came through in the chapter, but I learned so much about him, and I, my relationship with him was less complicated going forward, and that was a gift.
Yeah, it definitely came through in the chapter. I loved that chapter.
Thank you.
Is it a scary time to put a book into the world? I mean, the Virginia governor's race is like a cultural war over Beloved, right? Which
Right.
came out in 1987. I mean, what is it like to be an author right now, particularly an author who writes about race?
Yeah, well, I mean, I've been writing about race for a very long time. And so I don't feel surprised by this. And I mean, no one has attempted to ban this book yet. But it's a conversation, or it's a topic that I will always have. And so there will be people, you just can't. There are people you will not who will not be able to hear what I have to say about race. And I mean, that's been the case for a while. I wrote a piece in the Washington Post a few years ago about just how the whole. I've been listening to people who have been protesting about race for a long time. And so when Donald Trump was, the conversation was about how he had emboldened so many people to just, to say publicly what they had been thinking or had been saying in saying underground. And but I was not surprised by some of those conversations, because I've been having them or not having them with incredibly rude people
Right.
for a long time.
Yeah, you mean in letters and emails and
Absolutely, yes, and telephone calls. Yeah, so and it can be scary at times because people can be so mean.
Yeah.
But I just think that the reality is that, I mean, I honestly, I remember when I started the online forum for the Tribune called Exploring Race, and in the beginning, there were people who were asking honest questions, and that's fine, because I do think that we have to talk about race. We have to be able to have a conversation about it in order to just really get some things out in the open. But I think that at the core, respect has to be there. And when there are people who are just trolls, or who really, they just want to kind of throw a bomb into something and just not really have a fair discussion, or they're not trying to, they're not trying to get to some higher ground, then I don't know what to do.
They're trying to shut you down rather than
Right.
engage with you, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
What do you want people to learn and better understand about Chicago, both past and present, from reading your book?
I'll go back to the whole idea of communities. We are so one-dimensional in our thinking. When we say inner city, what does that evoke? When we say the South Side, what do you imagine? And so I think one of the things that's really important to me is the idea of people who have nothing to lose act that way. And so how do we give people, not just give, but how do we create environments where people have something to lose? I mean, this almost sounds like a morality debate, where we feel like we're superior if we don't do, if we don't do some things that we consider to be aberrant, and they are. I mean, some of this behavior really is bad. But when people have nothing to lose, then that's the way they act. And that's not just it's not just with Black people, but it's people who, I don't know, I just finished Squid Game. So, I mean, that whole, and it just really resonated with me on that level, because there are people who don't have a whole lot to live for. And so they're trying to survive. And what does that look like when you're in this like Darwinian space, where you're battling the people next to you for so few resources? And so when I think about the book, even when I talk about my community, I grew up in a privately owned apartment complex that was right across the street from a public housing development. And I think that some people, when they read that, it's almost like, I mean, it's clear in the book, but it's a very hard concept to see, because we think of public housing being somewhere else. But we had a bird's eye view of the decay of the community right next door to us, not down the street, not the next L stop or the train tracks or across the train tracks or something, but right directly across the street. And I saw how the systems on our side of the street, we're all Black folks. But I saw how this is, the janitors chased down wayward pieces of paper with a religious fervor on my side of the street. That didn't happen across the street in the housing project. And it was, so this whole idea, and in today's parlance, we would say that I lived in a place that was affordable housing. And so you can have affordable housing that is decent and that gives people the level of dignity that they deserve. We were all working class or poor people, but there were very different conditions. And that's one of the things that I think that if we can imagine these spaces where people, they don't have to wade through garbage in order to get to their apartments, or to navigate their hallways. They don't have to do this in the darkness because the city has not replaced a light bulb in a street lamp.
Right.
And that is, and people internalize that. And so we talk about, give people something to lose. And then, and then they're also acutely aware that the institutions and the systems that work in other places, whether it's the policing or it's the schools, that they work in maybe in the neighborhood a block away or maybe a mile away, but they don't work in their community.
Yeah.
That is trauma. It's
absolutely, and it's completely unreasonable to expect and ask people to adhere to a set of rules or standards or systems that isn't interested in working for them, or you've abandoned your role in keeping a person's life going in the right direction, and yet they're supposed to still hew to their role that you've assigned them.
Absolutely.
It's just unreasonable.
Well, and we were talking about, during the pandemic, let's get back to normal. Well, if your normal includes a functioning neighborhood where you can just walk to the grocery store maybe,
right,
and your grocery store is very well stocked, if your normal means that you're walking down the streets where the buildings are not boarded up, where you don't have to worry about just incredible crime, and so that, let's get back
or
to
wait in line for things,
right, exactly,
before they run out because you're
right. So if that's normal, but what about communities that are not functioning that way? And so the pandemic has just become another layer of a challenge that you have to navigate, as opposed to we get back to what. And that's what those are, I think that's the thrust of the book as well. Just the whole, this is a story about people, but it's also a story about place.
Yeah. Can you tell us how Deborah's doing now? Does she still keep in touch with Raymond's family?
Yes, Raymond's daughter created this amazing foundation, the Raymond K. Jones Foundation, and it gives scholarships to college students, as well as it helps with bereavement. And Deborah they've tapped Deborah a number of times to they've done a video or to go to participate in fundraisers, and Deborah's doing extraordinarily well. She did, for her, the prison experience, it was one of reform. And too often prisons warehouse, and that's all. But for her, and she also went in there trying, I mean, knowing she had an amazing support system in terms of her family when she went in. And when she left, same thing. Her mother passed away while she was in prison, but her sister has been outstanding, her aunt and her cousins. And so she's got an amazing support system. She's got friends and family, and she's got, she works full time. And the other thing that she did while she was in prison, she never really disconnected with the world. So she read constantly. And so she was very much aware of Google and Facebook and how technology was changing the world, because it was a very different world when she entered prison. So
Yeah.
she's doing well.
That's great. I love to hear that. Okay, can you see Three Girls from Bronzeville adapted for the screen? And who should play you?
Oh.
So your first answer is yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. You know, that's always tricky, because the book and the film adaptation really shouldn't. I mean, they should be related, but they shouldn't necessarily be twins. So I don't know. It would have to be in the hands of someone. And I should say that there is interest, and I adore the person who's interested. So I haven't thought about somebody playing me, but I'll think about that.
Okay. So what do you mean they should be related but not twins?
I've seen well, first of all, I love the book To Kill a Mockingbird, and I love the movie. And so that's one of those occasions where the screenwriter was able to take the book and really fashion it, adapt it to the big screen. But there have been some other less successful attempts. And so I just think that as I don't know that it works when you take the book and you're trying to just be so attuned or so faithful to the
wedded to
and so I just think that it just makes sense to it's a different animal. And so it's okay that they're related, that you see vestiges of the original, but it's its own animal.
Yeah. Okay, that's exciting. We'll have to watch for some kind of official announcement down the road. What's your relationship to Bronzeville now? And compare it, I guess, to your relationship or even understanding of Bronzeville when you were growing up there as a child.
Interestingly, when I was growing up there, I had no idea just the historical heft of the place, because it was just my given world. I was a child there, and my mother very much, and other relatives, they would say, "Oh, Gwendolyn Brooks lives here," And Gwendolyn Brooks, now, I mean, she's a goddess. And I bow before her memory. I just adore her. I mean, her writing is outstanding. First Black person to win the Pulitzer Prize. And then you had, I mean, all of these amazing people, Dr. Daniel Hale Williams, who performed the first successful heart surgery, not the first Black person to do it, but the first surgeon to do it.
Yeah.
And I mean, so I didn't understand the heft of the place. So when I go there now, I'm in awe of, I mean, it's like, it is, in many ways, it feels like hallowed ground. But at the same time, it also feels like it's still this place that had always been deformed and disfigured by redlining or and restrictive housing covenants. And so now the public housing project, the Ida B. Wells Homes, is no longer there, but it's a wide open field. And Lawless Gardens has this fence around it. And so it used to be that the fence was erected to kind of keep people safe. But now it's just there. It's just standing. And Lawless has changed. So Lake Meadows, which is the other development in the book, where Deborah, Kim, and I used to walk there to our ledge and hang out. It's still a thriving place, but a lot of it is undergoing gentrification, where you have a lot of people who are moving in, and they're not all white. I mean, you've got wealthy Black people who are buying the old brownstones and gray stones, and I mean, paying upward of, I mean, close to $1 million for these places.
Yeah.
So I think that in that area where the public housing project used to be, I mean, this whole idea of, I mean, can it be developed into a place? I know that there was talk before the 2007, 2008 economic downturn in building something. So there are a few townhouses, a few buildings there, but a lot of the land is still undeveloped. And so when I go there, I wonder what it would look like if there is affordable housing, you know, places that are beautiful, where we can do again what has been done over the decades. Because when the Ida B. Wells homes opened, they were, I mean, it was a bastion of just loveliness. There were gardens and all of even the architecture was innovative. But it's a matter of how do we keep these places? How do we sustain this? And I know that sometimes the narrative is that, oh, it's the residents. Well, it's the landlord too, the city for the public housing development. I mean, just did not do what it needed to do to maintain a place that was functional. So, I mean, that's what, when I go back, I mean, I still see these three girls, because I remember us, you know, kind of tearing down the streets, just running from place to place. But I also see in terms of the future that we've got to have, you know, new girls and new boys who run through the community and feel safe and feel whole.
Yeah. Okay, last question, and then I know Lonnie wants to hop back in here and share some audience questions. I wonder if you see this book as the story of you and Debra and Kim, or the story of you and Debra and the story of you and Kim?
Maybe all of the above, because it is a story about two sisters who adored each other. And it's a story about two best friends who adored each other. And so when you do the math, the three of us, though, I mean, there are only two of us left, but, you know, there's something that is so affecting about relationships that begin when we are new and just starting out. And you do not forget those people. You may not, you know, maintain the relationship, but they are so affecting. And I mean, as I said, they were the loves of my life, and they were my first great loves. And so it is a story about the three of us. And it is very important to say that Debra and Kim, being the younger of two sisters, I mean, I always say that Debra and I were best friends, but Debra and Kim were soulmates. And so Debra and Kim, Debra loved Kim dearly as well. So, and the same was true, vice versa.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, I think Lonnie is hopping. Oh, there's Lonnie.
Yeah.
Hi, Lonnie. Hi, Dawn. What a great conversation between the two of you. It was just so great to hear all the additional wraparound on so much information. We have a couple great questions from folks who have been tuning in, so I'll just jump right in. A quick reminder to everyone that we are going to be doing after hours. It's going to start at about 8:05, so that's 15 minutes from now, give or take. You can get in by buying a copy of this incredible book. It's getting so much buzz, so much great buzz. It's so nice to see that as well. So jump in, come hang out with Heidi and I and Dawn, and let's just see what everything's going on. So here we go. Question from Amy. Your mom and your Aunt Doris are such strong, steady. I don't know why I can't read this evening. Your mom and your Aunt Doris are such strong, steady heroines in your story. I was just wondering what your mom thought of the book.
Oh, that's a great question, because my mom has not yet read the book. And I understand that, because the book includes the death of her child. And so, I mean, she's another person that I really, you know, we were in lockstep in terms of, well, can I add this? Can I tell this story? And all, just making sure that it was okay to tell her business. But no, she has not read it. But my mother is my biggest supporter. And, you know, everybody, you should be lucky to have someone like her.
Devin asked a question. While he was reading it, he felt like he knew you, Kim and Debra. How is it to allow the world into your personal life?
Terrifying. But when you get in there, you have to. And as I said before, I had an editor who was just amazing, cool. I did not feel like, I mean, writing is incredibly lonely, but I did not feel like I was alone for so many reasons, but it's scary. And thank you, Devin. Yeah.
A quick question that sparked in my own mind. Were there particular memoirs that you felt were kind of like North Stars for you, where you kind of felt like, I like how this one feels or this one feels, where they maybe provide a little bit of inspiration to you?
I have so many, and I'm just looking right now around my office.
No, you can also save that for after hours. You can answer that now. Oh,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, that's an
huge
incredible
for
book.
me. Yeah, but no, I have a ton of them. When we can talk more about that
Yeah.
later. But
That
yeah.
Jesmyn Ward book, that was the first book of hers that I read. And I would read like 10 pages at a time and I'd have to put it down and go, that deep, very
Yeah,
deep.
very much.
Stephen is asking, please tell us about your scholarship at the University of Illinois.
Oh, yeah. It was really important to me to, I mean, and you hear this a lot. I mean, we often feel like it's so important to give back. And so a couple of years ago, I started a scholarship at the university because I wanted to support students who want to tell stories about Black people that go beyond the stereotypes. And so to change the narrative. We write a lot about pathologies, but I want to write about people and the things that they're doing with very few resources. And so I wanted to support students who also have that goal. And I thought it would be really cool to name the scholarship after myself and my sister. And so that's part of her legacy. And I'm really grateful for that.
Kitty has a comment here, but it's nice. There's a lot of people who just said like that they're so much enjoying the conversation. Kitty says, no questions here, but just praise. I love the sense that I met your family and your community and the fierce tribe of women who knit you all together. I could almost feel the sense of my own girlhood, pigtails flying in the adventures you narrate as you all explore your neighborhood and make secret forts in your own private worlds. It's a moving, illuminating story. You do them all proud.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Kitty. So appreciate that.
It must be so like after doing all that writing and having periods of anxiety and excitement and then put it out there to have the reverberation of the praise and such great acclaim must just be so deeply satisfying, I would imagine.
I'm very grateful for it, Lonnie. But I think I still feel like I'm on edge about, so the anxiety is still there. It's gratifying to write anything that people, when you write something and people read it, it's just, and then they read a book and there's so many, that's a huge investment of time and energy. And it sounds hokey, but I am so honored and I'm humbled by it.
Amy asks, as you were talking about place, I wondered if you worry that your story will be used by some as evidence that the people in beleaguered communities who don't succeed are making poor choices rather than responding rationally to the environment and system around them.
Yeah, no, because I think that people who don't understand that our choices are a function of our conditions. And I put Debra and Kim to the side a bit in that regard because they had safety nets. Someone asked me if I felt guilty about having gone in a different direction, and I always feel like I had to forgive myself, but I also had to forgive them for making it so dang hard for us, for people to save them. And so I think that that's important. But there are a lot of people who don't have this whole idea of choice. It looks like a choice, but when you have very few resources, you don't have a place where you can get a job, and the economy there is not all that legal, then you do what you have to do to survive. And I don't know how much of a choice that is, but
William is making a suggestion for the movie that Lisa Gay Hamilton should play you.
Oh, I love Lisa.
You need to start a little like a cheat sheet with the suggestions.
Yeah.
Abigail is saying, thanks for the excellent talk. Given your experience with you and your sister and Deborah's paths, what would you say are some of the most key features of a young person's life, especially kids in low SES circumstances, that contribute to whether they'll take a positive path or not?
Again, it goes back to those safety nets, and we absolutely had them. I mean, there is no point in my life when, I mean, I may have been a little snitty adolescent at times, but I never worried about whether I was going to have a home. I never worried about whether I'd be clothed. You know, the Maslow hierarchy of needs, they were always met. And so I think that is that there's so many kids. I mean, you know, I never, if I couldn't talk to my mother about something, I had this network of people that I could go to. And so that becomes really, if people don't have that, then there are these gaping holes in their upbringing and their basic lives.
Mm-hmm. There's here this question from Leonie. She says, is there an anecdote about Kim or Deborah or yourself that you wish you had included in the book, perhaps in retrospect, or a story you wish you had cut?
I think that we were able to get everything that I wanted to include. I hope you leave the books. I mean, my sister and I fought because we were sisters, but we adored each other. And that is every anecdote, with her. And when I went to college, it was our first time being apart. And at that time, The Color Purple had just been made into a movie. My sister had read the book, but she feverishly sent me letters. And I mean, just the, I love you, I love you, I love you, and things that you sometimes don't say, but you can write. But no, I think that I hope that I got the high points that I wanted to get from, both of them.
All right, and then Cindy, and I think we'll close out with this and we'll say a couple goodbyes. Cindy is asking, how is Hannah generally and her health? She's also curious about your comment in the book about your marriage and your husband moving in different directions than you based on where your child went to school. She says that was touched on but not detailed, so she wants to spill it right here. Go ahead.
Well, I don't know how much I can spill in so little time, but Hannah is doing extraordinarily well, and she was just so blessed that she had an illness where she could have not survived, number one, but even beyond that, had she lived, there were so many dire prognosis. I mean, the prognosis was pretty dire, but she just overcame a lot of that. So she's fine. And I would say that my ex-husband and I are friends, and I'm very grateful for that relationship, so that we were not able to maintain the marriage, but we have a friendly relationship, and that's good. Sometimes that's enough.
There was one quick question that had been submitted in advance that I had kind of wondered about when I saw it. It was on the Zoom registration form, which was Stephanie had asked, do you have any ideas about how the schools could have helped your friend and your sister earlier?
I was told from the very beginning that I was smart. I had amazing test scores and amazing grades, but I also was the kid who was, who was quiet and who fell in line. Debra and Kim were brilliant. And especially my sister with math. I mean, she just had a proficiency with math that was, I worked at it a little bit more than she did. And so I think I said this earlier, this whole idea of, how do you deal with kids who, and they were not completely disruptive, but they just did not fall in line with the teachers or our parents. Our parents were used to, I tell you to do something and you do it. And the same thing with teachers back then. And so they just, so whatever it was that they needed, they did not get. And both their parents and our parents and our teachers were a little bit at a loss. They knew what to do with the kid who was completely disruptive, and the kid who was, who fell in line and who just kind of follow the rules. And I was not perfect, I'll say that. But they did not know what to do with that kid who was just kind of the daydreamer. I'll never forget, we would say the Pledge of Allegiance, and the kids, we would be looking at the flag, and I would watch Deborah and she'd be looking out the window at the sky. And so I was watching her, so I guess I wasn't watching the flag. But she was just she was a kid who was different in the school system. So and there are kids now who are outliers, and And so the challenge is, how do we bring them in? Because we are losing a lot of talent. I mean, these are kids who maybe are the future CEOs of tech companies or something. I mean, they don't, they're wired differently. And so how do we encourage that? And at the same time, keep them, there's this balance of, got to reel it in a little bit so that you don't fall off the cliff. But we get that you like dancing around the edge.
Yeah, thank you for that. Heidi, thank you for yet another excellent fan interview. Thank you so much. Great job. It's great that you guys are also friends and colleagues. It's nice to have all those layers. They all show up. Dawn, it's been a pleasure to host. We hope to host you again.